Hello, my name is Josh, and I'm a watchaholic. Welcome to Horology Insanity.
What is up, my watch friends? So, check this out. We've got a third video now. We're looking at the Solas Starlight one more time, but I wanted to do another comparison video with it. And this time, I want to look at size. I want to look at 38 millimeter watches that I think are somewhat comparable to this. And I want to talk about how they do or do not feel the same or different on wrist, because this one surprised me. If you haven't seen it already, I'll link up here to my last comparison video where I talk about the Aventurine dials and I compare this Solas with my Zelos Horizons and with my Balticus Stardust. But in this case, I want to talk about, I mentioned it in my not a review video, but I was shocked to find out that this is a 38 mil watch. And I don't know if I'm just, getting off with my sizes and my estimations of them, but I really thought that this was a 40 millimeter case. The way that it wears on wrist, it really didn't feel small. And y'all know that I've got an 8-inch wrist. And so usually when I get into things like this, 38 is small for me. And I have a couple of 38 millimeter watches that I adore, but I don't wear them because they feel small. And the funny thing about this Solas, it never once felt small on my wrist. So let's talk about that a little bit. The first one that I want to compare it to is one of the very first 38 millimeter watches that I got, and that is the Vario Empire. This watch I went back and forth on forever when the Kickstarter was going on or when I knew that it was getting ready to launch, because I really like this design. I really like the way that they staged this and stepped up the case. I like the case back. Now granted, this says, I have one of the hand wound ones also that has a see-through case back, but I like the overall design aesthetic that they were trying to get from the Empire State Building in New York City. I really like the Art Deco styling and appeal. But as I've already mentioned, 8-inch wrist, 38 millimeter watches, well, most of them are just too small. They just wear too small. And so my sweet spot is 40 to 42 mil, with 41, 42 being most of my favorites. Even though I can wear upwards of 44-ish, 45, depending on the size of the way that the overall case is shaped and developed and dimensioned. But here's the funny thing about this Vario. I did not back the Kickstarter for these, and I regretted it. I ended up going on the hunt for them later, and I now have two in my collection that I bought secondhand. One of them being this auto, and the other one being the hand wound. I think it's the silver variant, the hand wound silver. But anyway, when I wear this watch, as much as I like it, it wears too small. And as a result, I end up not wearing it very often. But when I put these two watches side by side, I think that you might start to understand why that's the case for me. Now, if you have a smaller wrist, you probably aren't going to care as much, right? But for me, I don't want to wear a watch that's too small in the exact same way that I don't want to wear a watch that's too big. It's kind of like the Goldilocks story, right? Too big, too small, and then you always got something that is just right. Well, for me, 40 to 42 mil is just right. And so that's what I want. If I'm going to narrow down some keepers, and granted, y'all know I have far too many watches right now, but when I narrow these things down, I don't want a watch that I don't wear because it's too big or too small. In the same way as I don't want a watch that's going to stick around that I don't wear because it's uncomfortable. And so the Vario, while it's comfortable on wrist, it's just too small for me. And I think the biggest reason for that is look at the dial circumference. Even though these are both 38 millimeter watches, the fixed bezel on the Solas is so tiny that just the dial stands out. and it just looks bigger than what I think the 38mm dimension otherwise tells you. So that's my first one. Let's go ahead and throw that out. The second one that I'm going to hold up is also a watch that I adore, and I never wear it because it's just too small. This is the Zelos Nova. This is their hand-wound dress watch. And, of course, this is the Salmon variant with the guilloche pattern on the dial. Now, this watch is pretty limited production. They sold out in seconds. Well, maybe not. They sold out in minutes. Pretty hard to come by. People are trying to sell them for twice what we paid for them because that's just the way that people do. But with mine, you can see, once again, when I hold these up, even though they are the same case width and the lug to lug is actually pretty close, it's just the design of the dial and the way the bezel and the way that everything just sits on the Solas that makes it wear the way that it does. And it's more enjoyable. Again, I never once felt like this Solas was too small on my wrist. Not once. And even just sitting here thinking about putting on this Nova, it's like, nah, it's too small. Like, I love everything about it. I wish Elster would have made a 41mm of this exact watch. Keep the thinness, keep that super thin case. You can even keep the box dome crystal, keep the absolutely stunning salmon dial with the guilloche, keep all of this, but just make it like 41, or design it like the Solas did and really make that dial bigger so that it has a little bit more wrist presence. That's just my opinion. So anyway, that's another one. Now, the last one that I'm going to hold up is the infamous, oh, let's get a little bit of dust. Dust is everywhere. This is the Seiko, I think it's the SARB, it's a 033 or 035. I can never remember their model numbers, but there's a black one and a white one. This is, of course, the black dial one, and this is interesting because both of these watches wear slightly larger than the 38mm dimension otherwise suggests, but they do it for different reasons. As I've already mentioned, the Solas on the right does it because the dial is so much bigger and more prominent, and it just kind of stands out, and with the way that it looks like the night sky, it kind of sucks in your vision like a black hole does, and you just are kind of mesmerized by it. But that's not the case with the Seiko. You can see that the Seiko actually has a smaller dial the way that the other watches do that I just hold up, the Vario and the Nova. But in this case, the case, okay, maybe that was a pun. The case itself is actually thicker, and so it wears a little bit larger on wrist than the 38mm dimension suggests, kind of in the same way that like an oyster case or something else with a little bit more depth here in the lug. Like, look at how thick those lugs are on the Seiko compared to the Solas. And it's the case that gives you the presence on this Seiko than this. Now, that can be a pro or a con, right? So the pro is that it allows me with a larger wrist to wear this Seiko SARB and still enjoy it. However, now that I'm experiencing this Solas and the way that this dial pops, I prefer to have the larger dial, and I prefer for the dial to be the reason that the watch wears larger than the case. And so that's going to be a lesson learned on my part. That's going to be a, hey, I didn't know that until I actually experienced all these, and particularly until I experienced this Solas. But yeah, that's kind of the way that it goes. So anyway, that's my comparison. I just wanted to do, I don't have a bunch of 38mm watches, but I just wanted to show some side by side why the Solas does or does not wear like a 38. And I don't think it does. I think it wears like a 40. I was really shocked. I put the calibers on it and I was like, 38? No way. Yeah, I was surprised. With that one, my friends, let me know down in the comments, what do you prefer? Do you prefer for a watch to wear big, small, or right on? And if it does wear bigger than the size suggests, you know, have you experienced that it's because of either the dial or the case or some other reason? You know, maybe the lug width, making it 22 instead of 20 would probably also make it a little bit larger. I don't know. And so what have you experienced, and what do you prefer? Now that I've experienced this Solas, I think I prefer the large dial like this. Yep. All right, my friends, until we talk again, please remember what really matters, and that's not watches. Keep the insanity sane.